So venue named MoshPit has announced its closure coming up in November. It's an inner west Sydney live music venue. This has been obviously very devastating for the Erskineville dive bar and the community that regularly patronises MoshPit. It's going to be shutting its doors, citing rising operating costs and declining revenues. But not only is the closure of this venue a story, there's also been some interesting commentary around, the receiving of grant money by that venue from both the state and federal government, and whether that was targeted correctly or whether that was an appropriate use of grant money in the first place. So the venue has MoshPit. The venue received grants over the last few years. It's on King Street in Sydney. Received more than 150 grand in New South Wales and federal grants over the past few years to improve music infrastructure. So just a quick rundown of that history. It received $64,000 from the federal government's Revive Live grant scheme last financial year. That was to cover equipment, infrastructure and accessibility costs. In 24-25 financial year, it received 87 grand from the New South Wales government to improve accessibility, ventilation, equipment and soundproofing. And it also received 30 grand in 2023 to build emerging bands and support rising talent from the federal government's Live Music Australia program. Now, for their part, the MoshPit owner, Mitchell McLennan, said the grants definitely made a difference in improving the venue's stage and soundproofing, but they could not keep the venue open alone. He said, quite plainly, the cost of alcohol goes up every 6 months and people feel it. A schooner of beer is $11. That's a huge amount. People are just staying home.
Which is, a common thing that we hear a lot is that it's too expensive to go out, the cost of living the way that it is. But those, I think, 150,000, because that is, as you said, one of the debates around this is that it has received $150,000 in federal grant in taxpayer money. Sorry, state and federal, but it's still, taxpayer money. And it's still closing down. So has that been an effective spend? I would argue that upgrading infrastructure, equipment, soundproofing, ventilation, all of that is, I think, money well spent if you are intending on hosting live music, because it all ties into the big experience, right? The largest scheme of things is that if you go to a venue and it has terrible soundproofing, bad ventilation, you're not likely to want to go back. And I think that's, grant money well spent. And I think it's good that the government are offering up these grants as an incentive to these venues to be putting on live music. It's just a shame that in this instance, the venue is still closing.
Yeah, it is. It's a real shame. And I suppose it's a risk you take. And I would say also for those grants, like if those grants help keep the venue open another couple of years and got more bands on stages in that time and more audiences out and about, that's a good thing, irrespective of whether they eventually close. Also, the venue didn't know they were going to have to close, I'm sure they were very optimistic and wanting to continue, and the realities have made themselves clear as things have worn on. It's not like comparable to our recent discussion on Blues Fest, for example, where the writing was on the wall, they received a stack of money and then have made some outwardly, allegedly suspicious looking transactions, and move that money around, and now, the government's out of pocket and there was no event held. This money was used for its intended purpose and events continue to be held. They're just struggling to keep up now. But it's an interesting debate nonetheless. Shadow Arts Minister in New South Wales, Chris Rath, he said the $87,000 New South Wales grant went towards enhancing accessibility when the venue's closure came from rising costs. He said, why weren't the actual drivers of the venue considered when this grant was approved? The minister needs to be able to assure the public that when a substantial amount of their taxpayer funds is invested in something, there is a transparent process for how it will deliver lasting value. I think that's a valid question to ask, certainly, despite what I've just said. I think if this leads to perhaps better targeting of grants, that's a good thing. If we could kind of look at what does the venue need to remain sustainable, as well as what does the venue need from the perspective of infrastructure, and target grants in that way, I think that's absolutely a good way to do it. However, I don't think the existing grant money was necessarily wasted at the same time.
Yeah, I think upgrading that infrastructure, as I highlighted before, is a good use of money. I think without it, you would see that venue probably would have closed earlier, because either they need to spend more of their own money to do those upgrades, and therefore they have less of their own money to either do other sorts of upgrades or marketing or to pay for musicians or whatever the case is. That wouldn't have been spent there. It would have been spent on the upgrades to, the soundproofing and the the ventilation, the accessibility, all of that stuff. So we could have even seen this venue close sooner than what it's already set to do. Or, as I said, you want to build a community of people who are going to gigs all the time. And if those things aren't right, they're not likely to return. So if you're not spending money on those sorts of upgrades, then you're not building a community, you're not building a culture of music-going people in that town.
What we glean from this is that grants alone aren't enough to save a venue, and grants alone aren't enough to kind of stem this issue that we've got at the moment, where rising costs are creating issues and venues are closing quickly. There's more elements that need to be considered here and more answers that we need to work out to stop this.
I don't think the expectation should be that a grant alone will save a venue. I don't think you should be going, oh shit, we're going to fall unless we can get state government support, because that's not sustainable. It's not sustainable to be relying on the state or federal government to be giving you a handout every year to keep your venue functioning. Those grants, I think, should be used to better either the infrastructure or the marketing or whatever the case is. That should be used as an aid to support your business, not as a need, because without it, we will fail.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's maybe an argument in the middle there where you could say if we're in trying times and it's needed to keep the venue going, but you obviously don't want to be dependent on it year on year on year for your venue to be sustainable. Certainly. So yeah, it's an interesting debate. And I think like I said, I don't think the grants are wasted. I think scrutinising how taxpayer money is spent is a good thing. I think if you can better target that money, that's a good thing too. For their part, Chris Rath, who's the Shadow Arts Minister in New South Wales, he said the Liberal opposition would help Sydney's nightlife by cutting payroll tax for small and medium businesses, which I'm sure would be a burden reliever in one way as well. But again, probably not the whole picture in terms of whether a venue stays alive or not. The New South Wales Labor government has given $5.1 million to 39 venues in the 24-25 financial year to upgrade music venue soundproofing, energy efficiency, and AV equipment, which I have no issues with at all. And the Federal Arts Minister was asked about kind of the closure of MoshPit on 702 ABC Sydney. He said that investing in the venue through the grants was worth the risk. Quote, even though they're private venues, every extra bit of assistance at the moment makes a difference. It's devastating when we lose one, but we're determined to make sure that live culture throughout the country is something that survives. You've just got to take the risk and keep investing and keep providing, because for a whole lot of venues, that investment actually will be the difference.
Yeah, it will, because at the end of the day, these venues rely on people coming to it to make money. And if people aren't coming because the beer is too high, which is what the owner, Mitch McLennan, said, then the business isn't going to survive. So either, as you said, you use these grants to incentivize people to come, whether you're using grants to offset the tax on beer, or I don't know how you do it, but the other way is to actually just make the venue more appealing, which is through these sorts of upgrades. So without me continuing to hone on that point, the short of it is you need people to go to these venues, and that's what these grant assistance, should be used towards, in my opinion. Yeah,
they're playing a role, but it's like, as we mentioned, it's a multi-pronged problem that we're dealing with right now, because you've got the issue from the venue's perspective, no doubt, of liquor taxes that mean, every time you go to Sydney or even on the coast a lot now, you're spending over $10 just to buy a single beer. Like they're aware of their margins. They have, significant costs to operate the business in the first place. That's the number they've landed on to sustainably operate and turn a profit. And we want businesses to be profitable. Otherwise, they're not sustainable. So that's one part. You've got the liquor taxing and whatever the red tape that surrounds a business is, licensing, payroll taxing, whatever else, we know the state government has been working at alleviating some of those issues. There's also the change in consumer behaviour, whether that's been born out of cost of living. As you know, we see fuel skyrocketing again. For me, it's costing me like over $150 to fill my car up. Like that has an impact week to week. That means you can't do things as much anymore. When you're presented with going out, you want to buy 5 beers, you're paying $60-70 just to drink beer. It's easy to see how those decisions are being made. But not only that, we've discussed the changes in behaviour because of the COVID generation who didn't develop the habits of going out, because we lost 2-3 years of going out. There's the lockouts before that. There's the whole culture within Sydney and more broadly New South Wales, I think, that hasn't developed that going out culture as well. It's been a really tricky few years, and there's a lot of factors that contribute to this. So grants are one part of it, but they're not all of it. To me, like I was speaking, Cam and I was speaking before this, and we're like, well, I don't think we're not going to leave the analysis of this story with any answers, probably just more questions. But it's interesting to have these discussions nonetheless. Someone else engaging in this discussion is Joe Hardy, who we've kind of referenced on this pod a bit. He does some really good analysis on his blog, Joe Blogs, but he also co-founded Sydney's most comprehensive gig guide. It's called sydneymusic.net, so they've got a whole bunch of gigs on there week in, week out. And he said of the 373 different venues that put on gigs last financial year, just 19 hosted 100 or more shows in that time, including MoshPit. So this is a significant loss when it's one of the 19 venues that has the most shows in Sydney closing down. And Joe Hardy has said it was disturbing that Sydney was losing venues that consistently put on live music. He said, quote, "That is where I start getting into red flashing alarm bells territory." He also made the really interesting point that venues in their successful eras gone by were always uniquely the hosts of communities. They weren't just spaces for hire, which is speaking to another wider issue, I suppose, which you could almost transplant to the festival discussion too, where it's like, rather than just being a venue that you go to see this particular band at this particular time, where we need to be developing venues where people are just going there. Like, no matter who's playing, that's just a place they go. They know they're going to have a good time. They know the bands are going to be good, much like maybe the Lincoln Pin on the Central Coast is. There's a cohort of people that just go there. And perhaps we're losing that as well because it's more of appointment type stuff for people going rather than regular patronage, which we know is kind of the backbone of a lot of hospitality venues.
I think the cost of living, as you mentioned, is certainly part of it. Like, people are just having to say, well, I can't afford to just go out and enjoy live music like I would like to. I actually need to be more, I need to budget for that. And when you are being a bit more budget conscious, you are going to think, well, who do I want to spend that money on? Who do I need, and as a venue, you're thinking, who do I need to attract to, a headliner to get people to come along to the venue? And that's what we've come down to.